predominant Muslim populations, Southeast Asian countries, such as Malaysia, such as Indonesia, getting a trend of achieving individual rights and political rights in a way of asking rights under the basis of religious rights. We think there are two kinds of Muslims. Ultimately, in this debate, we're talking about one, moderate Muslims who are called madrasas. We're also talking about different kinds of Muslims, such as fundamentalists, which is still predominant in Iran and, for example, Saudi Arabia, where they create and legislate laws based on, for example, fundamental Muslim ideas. We see more literal interpretation or literal translation of Quran from these fundamentalists. We see more compromises in mutual respect coming from the moderate Muslims called madrasas. This debate is ultimately boiling down to a question: which pathway do we want to take as a Southeast Asian Muslim predominant population countries? To go with the line of Saudi Arabia countries which strictly follows, for example, Sharia law as a cultural norm? Or would we like to take a path of moderate Muslims who could actually learn more of a mutual respect in religious concept, religious identification and cultural identification, such as Turkey, Kazakhstan? We saw more moderate Muslims, more moderate Muslim pathways from those specific countries. We, affirmative side, clearly wants a model of Turkey and Kazakhstan where they have mutual respect. Even if they have, for example, Orthodox Christians, they accept them. For example, Western Turkish populations, more Muslim, they don't necessarily have a regional conflict or ethnic conflict upon those countries. Would like to strictly follow those models. If there's any signals or political behaviors in a political scene follows the Muslim countries such as Iran and Saudi Arabia, we definitely regret them. How am I going to deliver substantives in this country? Number one, how individual identification, religious identification matters, and how these individuals achieve those rights in a political scene matters, and how you taking the path of madrasas is better off achieving your own individual rights in those specific countries. Number two, how is political scene better off when individuals identify themselves with the madrasas and the fundamentalists? And three, we're going to also talk about potential next generations of how these people garnered as madrasas better off the political scene and conflicts, strictly according to the composition of demographics of Malaysia and Indonesia. Let's move on to number one argument. In which way can these individuals achieve their rights better? I think the civic culture of democracy is strictly followed in specific countries like Indonesia and Malaysia. But what you have to look at is how these individuals ask for this government to change. For example, if you take a pathway of extreme fundamentalist idea of Muslims, you're going to ask, for example, for these governments to be religious or, for example, fundamental. We see, for example, incidents in Iran where they require and mandate individuals to wear hijabs in public. It's not that these governments are irrational enough to oppress these women as a whole. It's just that government is strictly justified and say that under the God's word that you wanted to talk about, I would like to mandate hijab because it actually harms the public environment and public ambience itself. It's that these Muslim populations in Iran does not have any right to take off their hijab, even if they believe in hijabs, right? We're talking about these individual autonomies where how they ask this pathway of the government to behave matters in achieving their own rights. Meaning, when Malaysian Bumiputras in Malaysia ask their government, for example, to strictly more follow Sharia laws or any God saying, any divine saying, it's going to be a Malaysian party who predominantly marginalizes the freedom or, for example, constitutional rights of the individuals, right? And we see in Turkey, for example, Muslim women are mandated to take off their hijab and be secular, talking about things. We see people do not base their arguments upon rationality, but upon the divine sayings of their own fundamentalist ideas. We see madrasas are more open to the rational ideas and rational discussions, constructive discussions of how society should change. That's why individuals should not take a pathway of fundamentalist idea, but rather a madrasas idea. That's how their individuals going to achieve a little bit more rights than fundamentalism. Number two, how does the political scene better off? We see a very specific characteristics of Malaysia and Indonesia. For example, in Malaysia, there are Chinese, there are Indians, and there are Muslims. It is quite, but necessarily a peculiar thing in this specific country is that their ethnic characteristics equate to their own religious identities. That's why it is so important for you to be Bhumiputras, right? Because your party necessarily represents only your ethnicities and only your religious identities. For example, the slogan saying, "Let's be true Malay," actively marginalizes these Indians and Chinese because only Malays that they can pursue is Bhumiputras and Muslim populations only. How are these parties then going to interpret the ideas of opinions of these individuals? They're going to be more extreme, taking the pathway of the Saudi Arabia and Iran. For example, these parties, having a smear campaign upon opposition parties using the religious rhetorics, for example, that is a sodomy, so you should not take that party's ideas. These God's divine sayings actively cloud the individual's idea of rational calculus, which policy is going to fit me more or be more suitable for me. It's going to be a pedagogical ramification of these individuals. When these individuals do not win in the election, it's going to be more exclusive towards them. We're looking at such examples like Philippines, when Mindanao regions are actively and structurally barriered from basic rights. Because Mindanao regions, people are not following the ideas of madrasas, they're following rather extremism and fundamentalism ideas. I think this pathway actively hindered their own basic rights to be achieved because Philippines' predominant population is Catholic. I think it was a bad way to compromise. It is actually going to be more exclusive towards them, and it's going to be more marginalizing towards specific ethnic identities. Because you being a fundamentalist, you following those in Iran or Saudi Arabian ideas, make you more exclusive towards the idea, make you more marginalizing the other populations such as Indian and Chinese. That's why when Chinese, for example, party or Indian parties take more seats in a Congress, they're going to be sanely marginalizing these Muslim populations in a way of these Muslim populations achieving those specific rights. That's why it's going to be undemocratically marginalizing any kind of population who's losing. Why is it a problem? Because in a democracy, when constitution necessarily guarantees your basic right, even if you lose, even if you win, that's the right, that's the civic culture you have to garner as a democratic citizen. As a democratic citizen, you have to bear losing sometimes when you are not in a predominant vast majority, right? I think this is not going to happen, or for example, losing by its definition is going to lose their whole life because there's going to be active marginalization upon them. Third substantive is about how education is going to change. How these general next populations are garnered and actually characterizing themselves is going to be different when we take the pathway of madrasas. Madrasa's education is more open and mutually respectful towards other, for example, religious identities, so that they could actually not, for example, marginalize under the basis of my divine stain. I think it's going to be better politically seen when these individuals are garnered in these institutions of madrasas than fundamentalism. When they exclusively learn from these fundamentalist organizations that you are the one who's superior, you are the one who's actually following the order of the world. That's why these Southeast Asian countries should take a pathway of madrasas, not the fundamentalism such as Iran and Saudi Arabia. We regret that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sitting. I'm going to invite first negative for pronouns.
In the debate today, the affirmative team needed to prove that the unification of ideas and cultures would bring significant harms not only to societies, not only to individuals, but the global community. What we tell you on side negative is that the fact is that you can improve all these facets by creating a unification and the Arabization of these cultures. To begin with, we think that the characterization made by the affirmative team about Arabization essentially being extremism under their side was a total mischaracterization of the importance that many of these Middle Eastern countries have. What we tell you is that there's a large moderate voice in a lot of these extreme countries. And what happens when you allow Southeast Asian nations to identify with those moderate voices is you create a larger, more unified front in the fight against extremism. We under this side fight against extremism in a really powerful way because you give them more legitimacy and more voice as opposed to their conception that you would now become more extreme if you adopted Sharia law. We think that there's a really powerful position that Southeast Asia play to unifying this moderate voice, and it trickles down to extreme countries, but also empowers minorities within the Southeast Asian population we were always happy to propose. So I'm going to do three things in this debate. Firstly, tell you why collectivization in cultures is really powerful. Secondly, why extreme isolation of these people, what happens when you don't allow them to collectivize. And finally, I'm going to tell you about the importance of combating radicalization with a unified front. So this first idea of why we support collectivization in cultures. We on this side of the house generally support the part that religion plays in an individual's life. And we see the benefit in people creating their own conceptions of what their religions are like. We think that the Middle East particularly plays a very important role in the power of Islam to particular people. We think that the fact that the Middle East has a large part to play in Islamic culture, talking about Mecca, and the origins of that culture in of itself have a really powerful part to play. We think it's incongruent to allow those individuals not the ability to actualize with the Middle East in that way. We secondly think that we wouldn't regret something that improves the constructivist nature of the state's behaviour. We think that regions have a really important part to play in this debate. We think that when you allow individuals to collectivise on those particular regions, on those particular cultural ideas, you create really good things within those countries, but also in the global community. We think to the extent that you would regret something as powerful as the global community, we think you fail to understand the importance that it plays in this part. We have a lot of rhetoric from the affirmative team in this idea that we would pick and choose which particular countries have an important part to play. What we tell you is that the countries that they want to talk about, such as Turkey, are actually leaders in the faith of Islam, and we think they play a really important role in the discussion about these situations. We don't buy the characterization that they are in some sort of a vacuum. And what we tell you is, moreover, that when you create those vacuums, you create really harmful situations for a lot of those states. On this second idea of the impact of extreme isolation for a lot of these people in these societies. What we heard from affirmative was this constant idea that democracy is a tenet, and therefore we think that when you impede on that through a cultural identity, you create really harmful things. I'm going to tell you two reasons as to why this probably isn't the case. We tell you that, firstly, specifically in a lot of Southeast Asian nations such as Malaya, such as Myanmar, that you create a lot of these groups are marginalised in those cultures, right? We tell you that examples such as the Rohingya riots and the Gajaware riots, where thousands were killed, thousands of Muslims were killed, that there was impetus to actually allow these people to collectivise in a really powerful way. The fact is, when you have these groups being constantly perpetrated by the majority in these cultures, it's really harmful for them, and it really sees a loss of identity for a lot of those individuals in those cultures. We think it's really dangerous when you don't allow them to believe what they want to believe, because we want to encourage a system whereby, firstly, they collectivise, which is really powerful for them within their own country, because it means that they have now a common voice and a common idea under Arabisation. But secondly, it also empowers themselves, right? They become more influential within their communities, they're able to have a bigger part to play in democracy. We think that's far more powerful for those individuals to come under that common guise of a culture and particular idea than what they wanted to provide, which was not allowing them the possibility in the future of having powerful rhetoric. We think that also what this does is it does two key things. Firstly, it means that they're now part of an important group. We think given that Islam is one of the biggest faiths in the world, it's really important to be a part of that in a very collective way. We think to the extent that you now told that you can't engage with that system because of your geographic location, that's really harmful for not only those individuals as an individual, but also for those communities and groups together. Secondly, what we think it does is it means that you now reduce the capacity to be marginalised by those cultures, right? So to the extent that now you are part of a wider, beyond the bounds of your borders, you are now becoming an international problem within the system. To the extent that people in India are being killed by their Prime Minister, we think that there was necessary steps that need to be taken to incentivise those systems, right? We think that the international community has a really big part to play in removing those marginalisations and removing the capacity to be marginalised. We think the engagement that you can create was far better under our system than under the affirmative side of the house in this debate. We also think that we have to be really comparative in the way in which we look at the Middle East and Southeast Asia. We think that for a lot of the countries in the Middle East, they are in a vacuum. And we think what you do is you have a very good cross benefit when you allow those groups to meaningfully engage in a really powerful way. We think that a lot of harms that are associated with a lot of countries in the Middle East, such as Iran, is that they aren't able to, moderates aren't able to look to a bigger and higher voice. We think that like what you do is, when you have that collective idea going beyond the boundaries of your border, is you create a powerful discussion in those countries and also external of those countries. Finally, onto this idea of the importance of combating radicalisation with a unified front. They wanted to constantly tell us in this debate that extremism will exist even more. What we tell you is that currently extremism does exist in a lot of these Southeast Asian nations. ISIS is becoming one of the largest problems within a lot of systems in the world. What we think happens is that you actually equalise a lot of those problems. We think that when you at the point at which ISIS has that grapple hold and is impossible to target over a variety of different cultures and ideas, is that when you have a common and large population behind a common goal, it means that now you can identify and create a unified front against those types of radicalisation. This means that you can meaningfully shape not only solutions across borders and across ideas, and meaningfully shape ideas and ways to solve and combat those issues, but it also means that you have an imperative to solve those problems internally, right? So to the extent that you can now deal with ISIS in a more meaningful way because you have a clear opposition in those ideas, this means it creates benefits in that way too. Finally, we think it has a lot of benefits to the global community. We think that Islamophobia is very much a rife issue because of the dispersion of ideas, because people can't see a unified front against those problems. We think that when you allow the Southeast Asian regions to engage in a meaningful way with the Middle East based on cultural identity, it means unification is imperative to show that there is a common idea, so that Western countries can perceive there's some sort of benefit. We think that this means that you can change the perception of the Islamic faith for a lot of people around the international community, but it also changes the faith, the perception of the faith to those moderates themselves as being the ones in power and control. The vacuum means that they can never engage. The system that they want to provide meant that they could never engage in a very meaningful way, and we could never stop those problems from ever occurring. We think that what you do is you actually create important rhetoric and discussion around the issue of radicalisation we were always happy to oppose.
Alright, I think the first negative, now I'd like to invite Mr. Michelle again to speak for pronoun as he or they.
Before we get any further, to clarify any potential confusions further down the house, this debate is not about we should ban Islamic religion, we should ban radicalization, we should fight radicalization. This is a value judgment debate on whether the presence of Arabization, the South Arabian style branch of Islam is appropriate. Is this a beneficial effect on Southeast Asian countries, such as Malaysia, where there are populace that is very significant, Islamic populations that are very significant within the community. So this debate is supposed to be about when national identity and religious identity of an individual, should it be separated, should it be maintained in the state, or should it be coalesced? Which provides a better synergy, which is better for the state? The government has been providing very good contextualization of what this debate is about. The opposition early lost debate because so far all their argument hinges upon we should ban Islam because, or sometimes we should allow Islam because it is we should allow minority views. We'll get into that as we go into constructives. I think most of my rebuttals will be incorporated, but a couple quick rebuttals. The elder came up and says they don't want marginalization, but at the same time, they push for a caliphate. Because that's what exactly South Arabia stands for. What is a caliphate? Caliphate is a state ruled by a caliph, a god's deputy on earth. His choices and decisions are absolute and infallible. That means the state has an absolute right in doing what the caliph believes to be right,
is an absolute value judgment. Okay, maybe that's your own self-actualization. But when that is not your decision, such as in Malaysia, as my PM has already characterized to you, Malaysia is a community of 3 major races commingling with each other, and is from which are Malay, Chinese, Indian, all with different beliefs, all different characterization, all different religions, and they survive and create a thriving community by the characteristic of compromise. This is only possible under secular state, such as the Turkey Islam that we have been talking about constantly. It's a secular state. There is a very popular religious belief called Islam, moderate Muslim within the community, within the country, but it is not required by law to wear a hijab, to always uphold the Quran and all the other Islamic teachings. It is up to the individual. It is not guaranteed by state. It is not enforced by state. All this idea about they can collectivize, Muslims in Turkey can still assemble and collectivize, and I think they do it better than in Malaysia, in Saudi Arabia anyways, because there is different branches of Muslims that can meet and gather, even if their viewpoints within the Muslim may be different. And second, because in Malaysia, because there are these other individuals, other groups such as Indians and Chinese, Muslim population in Malaysia are more naturally incentivized to collectivize, and there is no oppression under the secular state that is in process right now. We think this is a better model rather than this Arabization of you must believe in one thing because it's the absolute gospel, literally the good gospel truth that you absolutely have to follow because we decide for you. That is not the world we want to live in. And lastly, this contextualization of how they try to frame Islam as ISIS and they have to provide unified front. I don't know if they're trying to provide a big stand for the moderate Muslims or even if it's unpopular fundamental ideology which is supported, they have to be a lot more consistent in their argumentation. I don't think they understand what Islamic religion is. I don't think they understand which house we're talking about. They're talking mostly about the Western civilizations with all these different kinds of unpopular ideas. We're talking about Southeast Asia where Muslims are already a very big part of contributing society with the direction in which these nations are headed that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Then, we have to look at all these adverse geopolitical consequences in human rights that we're going to see naturally occur. Like we told you, we're talking about a Saudi Arabia Islamic Caliphate, ruled by Caliph, Allah's deputy honor. This means this Saudi Arabia is the one true state. It is righteous by definition. It is infallible. If that is your own belief, okay. If you want a little bit harsher law to better restrain yourself and you could better self-actualize, that's fine by me. But if this rhetoric empowers you to subject others under this absolute mentality, there is absolutely no counter-argument possible. All these itty-bitty challenges and temptations that you face, such as human rights violation and constitutions, are simply temptations to be overcome by the firm faith in the belief that we which believe is the right way to go. Whatever you tell me will not work because I know it is the evil temptation that's trying to get me away from the truth. This is, once again, not appropriate. As my team clearly told you, very clear characterization. Nations like Singapore or Malaysia, where there are many races commingling due to compromise, because it needs a secular state. Turkey Islamic-based kind of state. In these cases, it is not allowed because these compromises are not allowed because you're giving in. Human rights violations are simply justified because even whether you agree to or not, it is de facto, you have to do it. But also, second level analysis is that when the interest of Saudi Arabia, so that was individual national and religious identities, but as a collective identity of nationalism and religious identity, when the interest of, say, Saudi Arabia and Malaysia is in conflict, because Saudi Arabia is essentially the one true state, and you are a satellite state of that one true caliphate that you're supposed to support due to the very nature of your belief, you have to give in to every single demand they claim. Because it is for the purpose of God, it is for the bringing the true country of God upon this planet. This is a clear loss of sovereignty and identity. Again, if you're okay with that, fine, maybe it's the correct explanation. But once again, in the Southeast Asian nations that we're talking about today, if you're not, or even more, you do not even have a voice to opinionate whether you should have this kind of laws or not, your rights to autonomous identity in itself is wrong. I think it is a very logical step, and we prefer the moderate madrasa school that we've been characterizing through Turkey throughout the PM speech already. This debate really should be about a value judgment of whether Islamic faith within Southeast Asia should continue to follow this sudden, more recent trend of Arabization, of understanding that Saudi Arabia-style caliphate may be what is beneficial for everyone or that is involved in the Southeast Asian nation communities. I think by this point it's pretty clear that it is not in the interest, especially in the context of the Southeast Asian nations, when there are people of various beliefs, whether it be majority or not. The negative side today is essentially pushing for the tyranny of the majority, because all other voices will be pushed out of the discussion for no other reason than they were born into the religion and they were very minor compared to the major big forces in planet today. That is why we are very proud to propose.
Thanks, second affirmative, and now invite second negative, whose preferred pronoun is he or they.
Yeah.
We in the opposition do not see Arabization as this like strong force, right? We see this as a natural progression. We see this as just happening as it does, and that we see that Muslims have a range of people, from fundamentals to radical people to people who are very moderate, right? This happens in all religions. And we also want to say that like, just because a Muslim is more fundamental in values or more moderate, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad people, right? We on the opposition think that the radical like Muslims, like in any religion, right? The radical people who promote violent acts in the name of their religion are the people that we don't like. We don't mind fundamental or like moderate Muslims. We don't discriminate between them on this side of the house. Okay, so first to get into some rebuttal and some key contentions in this debate. Now, firstly, what I was talking about, this distinction between fundamental and moderate Muslims, and we thought this was like a very like non-issue in this debate, right? We said that like if some people want to be more traditional in their regards to how they practice their religion, that's fine. It's the same with like people of Catholic religion who take a very like strong stance against like sex before marriage, and people who take like a much more liberal stance to that. Like it happens in all religions, and that's fine. And also we say that like even if like that's what I got to say on that point. The second intention I want to talk about is this idea that like minorities are more likely to engage in extremist behaviour. We got this characterisation from the opposition that like minorities in Southeast Asian countries, or like the Muslims, that because they're minorities, were engaging in radical behaviour. And we say that like while this might be true, there's also like radical behaviour from like the other religions in those countries, like Catholics, and like both people have been perpetrating radical behaviours. And even if this was true, right, like if we brought this idea that like minorities are the cause of like radical behaviour, like gaining a single identity, like gaining a larger, more coherent identity would solve this problem, as they would no longer be a minority, and they would no longer, their cause would be legitimised, and they would no longer need we don't advance, but it's saying that the minority won't exist, and then the idea that the minorities create radical behaviour wouldn't exist either. We also heard this idea about like a secular state, right? Like secular states are the best tool for like governments to like represent the interests of their people. And we said that like this is true, and that you can still have like a secular state that represents like the views of its people, like especially when we say that like in Arabization of these countries, people have the Muslim people have like a lot stronger identity. They're more coherent, and they like have a much stronger like push in like the political system, because they have a more like a larger voice. And like this is how like secular politics works, right? It's like the majority. It's the people who like they vote for like people who represent their views, and they get a stronger stance in the secular state, and then they're able to push like through like the things that they want to push through. And we also have this like this really like naive characterization of Middle Eastern nations as well. This idea that like they are just always fundamental, they will never change. And we like to put forward that like a lot of these Middle Eastern nations are like really progressive and really pushing for like progressive change. Like countries like Turkey that are really trying to engage with the West, become more liberal, and like they're like moving towards like more moderate forms of like Muslim that the opposition likes to rant about. And we said that like this is a good thing, and like it's sort of like a solid non-fluid change that like even though like the identity grows, there's still room for change in this identity, and it's not just going to stay like fundamentals as like radicals as like the opposition would like to suggest they do. Yes, and we also want to this idea that like because we don't understand Islam, that like that we should like not like let it happen, right? Like yes, like I don't fully understand like Muslim people, right? But what I do understand is at the very least that like they don't cause harm, that they what we're enabling is the practice of like their religious freedom, and they get like a huge like we all do. The ability to practice like our beliefs is like a huge benefit, and that we shouldn't stop something because we do not fully understand it. And that's for this side of the house, we're proud to stand by that. Now onto substantive material. I've got 2 points for you, or one big point for you today, split up into 3 parts. The point is that it's very good that a coherent Islamic like identity that would occur from this would be enable greater trade links, a strengthened economy by both sides of the Middle Eastern nations and Southeastern Asians, and also thirdly, stronger diplomatic ties. So the first benefit of this is a coherent Islamic identity gives Southeast Asian countries a strong platform to negotiate trade with Middle Eastern countries, right? And this is especially important because these countries are complementary like economies, right? Like Middle Eastern economies have like a huge hold on the oil reserves in the world, and like a lot of Southeast Asian countries such as India and stuff really require like these oil exports, right? And like it's going to be much easier to like foster trade negotiations when like these countries are like have a strong coherent identity, and that like the exporting nations in the Middle East know that their interests are going to be protected by fostering trade with Southeast Asian countries, and we'll be able to like foster strong trade links, better prices, and stronger economies. And it's also important to note that this like spills over right to people who don't identify as like Islam, and that's good because these spillover effects benefit people who aren't just identifying with this religion. Secondly, this idea that like a larger coherent Islamic identity in Southeast Asian countries allow people to demand services that they once were not able to demand in these countries, right? Like Islamic banking, which is like the idea that like banking is practiced in regards to the beliefs of Islam. Things like they don't, Islamic people don't pay interest, they don't believe in the paying of interest for riba, and that is actually a very effective banking system because it believes in risk sharing and ensuring that projects will return profit because both parties involved only make a profit when this project is successful. And a lot of Western banking systems are getting into Islamic banking and providing Islamic banking services. And when you have this coherent Islamic identity, people can demand these services because there's groups involved that makes it feasible for banks to set up Islamic banking services, and this is really beneficial. And thirdly, this idea of diplomatic ties. But because we get stronger international trading links, this also fosters deeper diplomatic ties between these countries, a stronger inter-country talks. That breaks the Western hold on things the Western hold on things like development banks and other things like that, making the Southeast Asian countries and Middle Eastern countries a much stronger force in the Western world, legitimizing practices the way that Islamic people conduct business and conduct their politics and stuff like that, reducing the need for the apparent need for radical Muslim actions and things like that. And for these reasons, we are proud to oppose.
Alright guys, and now by third act, choose the pronouns he or his.
We told you from the get-go that when building a Islamic nation in Southeast Asia, there's generally a crossroads by which you could choose. So either you go with a Turkey style of construction when it comes to the framework of your governance, or a Saudi Arabian style. And we regret the fact that the Arabization within the Southeast Asian area has trended towards Arabization, which leads to women more or less being discriminated. Like for example in Sharia law, when women have less testimony matters much less when it comes to rape cases and them being beaten. When women in Saudi Arabia are not allowed to not wear the hijab. I mean, like, all these things are legitimately mutually exclusive things that happen when you have a Saudi Arabization style of governance. That's why we find it really strange when Second Neg comes up and tells us, well, fundamentalism in modern Muslim nations, well, not really much of a biggie, right? I think there's a huge difference between Muslims of different beliefs, right? Different degrees of beliefs. Why? Because one group, on the other hand, creates in-groups and out-groups where religion supersedes national identity. The other group is more willing to co-opt such national identity without necessarily harming other things. So what are the things they wanted, right? They wanted like stuff that we wanted too, basically. They wanted collectivization, they wanted peace, they wanted identity formation. We never heard exactly how Arabization led to such things. In fact, to the contrary, we told you how they didn't lead to those things. And I'm going to get through that in my two issues. First of all, talk about how Arabization in Southeast Asia has been generally bad for politics. First thing, he says that it's nice that we're able to engage with Saudi through Malaysia. Basically, his argument is that, oh, you're a Muslim, and I'm fundamentalist Muslim too, then we definitely must get along. Well, okay, that might be true, which we definitely think is a bit like bigoted in general, but let's say that might be true. Well, okay, let's say you're friends with Saudi Arabia. What kind of benefits do you have? My previous speaker told you that, look, your sovereignty is infringed upon because then Saudi Arabia can just call the shots in your own political arena. We never heard any response to that. Second, he said that, look, this is like a really assertive argument. If you're friends with Saudi Arabia, you'll get better oil prices. That's not true. Saudi Arabia doesn't set the oil prices. The oil price is set by OPEC, which is a cartel of various other Muslim countries. There's just a fundamental misunderstanding of how the global market